After the death of our child, grief turned to blame and distance between us. This is my raw recount of pain, blaming, and the unexpected path toward forgiveness and unity.
They say grief is a journey, a winding, desolate road. But what they don't tell you is that sometimes on that road, you pick up something else, something heavy and sharp, something that cuts deeper than sorrow itself: blame. For me, that blame wasn't directed at fate or God or even myself. It landed squarely on the shoulders of the man I had promised to love forever, my husband, David. There are moments etched into my memory, not with the gentle warmth of remembrance, but with the searing pain of a fresh burn. One such moment is the sight of David standing by the crib, an empty, hollow look in his eyes that mirrored my own. But while my emptiness was a gaping maw of loss, his, to me, felt different. It felt responsible. And in that raw, visceral landscape of shattered dreams and silent rooms, the responsibility I felt was a cold, hard stone of accusation. I remember the day we brought Amelia home from the hospital, her tiny hand gripping my finger, her eyes, impossibly wide and blue, already full of wonder. David, usually so composed, was a mess of tears and goofy smiles. He held her like she was the most fragile, precious thing in the universe. And she was. She was our universe. Every day with her was a miracle, a laughter-filled symphony that echoed through our home. Our lives were woven together with threads of pure, uncomplicated joy. Then came the silence, the kind of silence that doesn't just mean a lack of sound, but an absence, a void that swallows everything. It followed her death, a chilling shroud that suffocated the air in our once vibrant home. The laughter died, the music stopped, and in its place an unspoken question hung heavy between David and me, a question that twisted and festered into a deep, poisoning resentment. How could this have happened? I'd look at him across the dinner table, the same man who once made my heart sing, and all I could see was the shadow of that question. Every movement he made, every quiet breath he took, felt like an affront. He was still here, we were still here, but our daughter wasn't. And in the depths of my despair, a voice whispered, insidious and cold, that it was his fault, that if he had just done things differently, if he had just been more careful, if he had just, then maybe, just maybe, she would still be here. That whisper grew into a roar in my mind, a constant deafening cacophony that drowned out any logical thought, any compassion, any memory of the love we once shared. It wasn't a conscious decision to blame him, it was an instinct, a primal need to assign fault, to find a reason, an explanation for the unbearable pain that had ripped through our lives. And David, in his own stunned grief, became the target of that raw, misguided fury. Our once solid foundation, built on years of shared dreams and unwavering support, began to crumble beneath the weight of this invisible accusation. Each passing day saw us drift further apart, not separated by physical distance, but by an ocean of unspoken words and festering bitterness. The man I loved became a stranger, a symbol of my pain, and I, in turn, became a ghost haunting the ruins of what we were. I didn't want to feel this way. A part of me, a deep, buried part, screamed at the injustice of it all, at the self-destructive path I was on. But the other part, The dominant, grief-stricken part clung to the blame like a life raft in a stormy sea, even as it dragged me deeper into the abyss. It was the only thing I had left to hold on to, the only explanation for a world that had suddenly made no sense, and it forced us both into a darkness I never thought we'd escape.
Before the darkness, there was light, so much light. David and I met in our early 20s, two ambitious, slightly naive souls navigating the bustling streets of London. I was fresh out of university, working my first job in marketing, and he was an architect, all quiet intensity and thoughtful smiles. Our first date was at a small Italian restaurant in Soho, the kind with red and white checkered tablecloths and flickering candles. I remember him asking me about my dreams, not just my career aspirations, but the deeper, more whimsical ones. I told him about wanting to travel, to write, to have a home filled with warmth and laughter. He listened, truly listened, with an earnestness that disarmed me. Our courtship was a whirlwind of discovering shared passions, long walks through Richmond Park, impromptu weekend trips to the coast, late-night conversations about everything and nothing. He made me feel seen, truly understood, in a way no one ever had before. We talked for hours, sometimes until the sun rose, dissecting philosophical ideas, sharing childhood memories, planning our future. His steady presence was a balm to my sometimes anxious mind, and my vibrant energy seemed to pull him out of his quiet contemplation. We married 3 years later, a small, intimate ceremony surrounded by our closest family and friends. I wore a simple ivory dress, and he a tailored suit that made him look impossibly handsome. The vows we exchanged felt profound, not just words, but a sacred promise of a life entwined. We bought a small, cozy house with a garden in the suburbs, a place we dreamed of filling with children and memories. We spent weekends painting walls, tending to the nascent rose bushes, and picking out furniture that felt distinctly us. It was a partnership, a true merging of two lives into one beautiful, evolving narrative. Children were always part of the plan, a natural progression of our love. We talked about names, about nursery colors, about the kind of parents we hoped to be. When I found out I was pregnant, the joy was overwhelming. It felt like the culmination of everything we had built, a tangible manifestation of our love. We spent 9 months in a bubble of excitement, reading baby books, setting up the nursery with careful precision, dreaming of the little life that would soon join our own. David would talk to my belly, his voice soft and full of wonder, telling our unborn child about the world, about our love, about all the adventures that awaited them. And then there was Amelia. She arrived on a crisp autumn morning, a tiny bundle weighing just over 7 pounds, with a shock of dark hair and those incredible, intelligent blue eyes. The moment they placed her in my arms, my heart felt like it expanded to encompass the entire universe. David cried, silent tears streaming down his face as he held her for the first time. He was a natural, instinctively protective, and endlessly patient. He'd spend hours just watching her sleep, his face alight with a tenderness I had never seen before. Our home transformed into a haven of baby giggles, the rhythmic sounds of lullabies, and the sweet scent of baby powder. Amelia was a bright, curious child, quick to smile, quick to explore. She had David's calm demeanor, but my adventurous spirit. We'd take her to the park, her tiny hands reaching for the falling leaves, her infectious laughter echoing around us. Our evenings were filled with storybooks, bath time rituals, and the quiet comfort of watching her sleep, feeling the profound gratitude of parenthood. David adored her. He was the one who taught her to ride her tricycle, carefully guiding her small hands on the handlebars, his voice a steady reassurance. He'd spend hours on the floor building intricate block towers that she would gleefully knock down, only for him to rebuild them with a patient smile. He was her hero, her protector, and she his little shadow, following him everywhere. Our love for her and the joy she brought became the very air we breathed. We were a family, whole and complete, a perfect triad of love. We believed we were untouchable, shielded by the sheer force of our happiness. We were wrong. So terribly, devastatingly wrong.
The day it happened, it was an ordinary Tuesday. One of those deceptively normal days that retrospectively become the pivot on which your entire life turns. Amelia was 4 years old, full of boundless energy. We were at the local nature park, a place we visited often. It had a lovely meandering stream, walking paths, and a small playground. David had taken the day off, and it was supposed to be a perfect family outing. We packed a picnic. Amelia insisted on bringing her favorite teddy bear, Barnaby, whom she often treated as a co-conspirator in her adventures. The sun was shining, a gentle breeze rustled the leaves, and the air smelled of damp earth and fresh greenery. We ate sandwiches by the stream, Amelia giggling as she dipped her toes in the icy water, David holding her hand tightly, ever vigilant. After lunch, we headed towards the playground. Amelia, seeing the swings in the distance, pulled away from David's hand, yelling, "Faster, Daddy, faster!" and began to run ahead, her little legs pumping with excitement. David called after her, "Amelia, wait! Stay close!" But she was already a tiny blur, her pink hat bobbing amidst the trees. I remember laughing, "She's so quick!" thinking nothing of it. We picked up our pace to catch her. Then I saw it, or rather, I didn't. The small, unassuming culvert, disguised by overgrown shrubs, hidden from casual sight. It was a drainage ditch, deeper and wider than it looked, leading into a fast-moving section of the stream after heavy rains. The Park Service had signs, but they were small, almost swallowed by the foliage. Amelia, in her eagerness, veered slightly off the main path. David, a few steps behind her, suddenly yelled, "Amelia, stop!" His voice was laced with a raw panic I'd never heard before. My heart leapt into my throat. I saw him lunge forward, a desperate, frantic movement, but it was too late. One moment, Amelia was there, a vibrant splash of pink against the green. The next, she was gone, vanished. The ground where she had been was empty. The air grew still, heavy with a silence that screamed louder than any sound. David scrambled forward, a guttural cry tearing from his chest. I followed, my legs suddenly like lead, my mind refusing to process what my eyes were seeing, or rather, not seeing. He was at the edge of the culvert, staring down into the rushing water. He jumped in without a second thought, the water churning around his waist. I stood frozen, my hands clasped over my mouth, a silent scream trapped in my throat. He searched frantically, his face contorted in agony. It felt like an eternity. People started to gather, drawn by his cries. Sirens wailed in the distance. When they pulled her out, downstream, much further than seemed possible, she was lifeless. Her small body, so still, so utterly devoid of the sparkle that had been her essence. Barnaby, her beloved teddy, was clutched tightly in her cold, tiny hand. The world dissolved into a blur of frantic paramedics, hushed voices, and my own uncontrollable sobs. David was beside me, his clothes soaked, his face streaked with tears and mud. He held me, but his embrace offered no comfort, only a shared, suffocating despair. In that moment, as they tried to revive her, as I watched their efforts fade into resignation, a cold, venomous thought slithered into my mind. He was supposed to watch her. He let go of her hand. He didn't stop her. It was an ugly, irrational thought born of unimaginable pain, but it lodged itself deep within my psyche, a toxic seed. In the days and weeks that followed, grief became a physical entity, a crushing weight that pinned me to the bed, but blame was its shadow, always present, always lurking. David was a wreck. He didn't eat, didn't sleep, didn't speak much. He moved through our once happy home like a ghost, his eyes permanently haunted. He tried to reach me, to hold me, but I recoiled, physically and emotionally. His touch felt like a burning brand, a reminder of what we had lost, and more importantly, how we had lost her. "It was an accident, Sarah," he'd whisper, his voice raw, trying to hold my gaze. I tried, I ran, I couldn't get to her in time. I'd just stare at him, my eyes filled with pain so profound it felt like hatred. "You let go of her hand," I'd say, my voice flat, devoid of emotion. It wasn't a question, but an accusation. Each word was a shard of glass aimed directly at his already bleeding heart. I saw the flinch, the defeat in his eyes, but I couldn't stop. It was as if by blaming him, I could somehow make sense of the senseless, could find an external target for the rage that consumed me. The silence between us grew. We ate dinner in separate rooms, slept in separate beds. His attempts to talk, to share his own grief, were met with stony silence or cutting remarks from me. I refused to acknowledge his pain, convinced that mine was greater, purer, because I was the one who hadn't failed her. I saw his guilt, a heavy shroud around him, but instead of pity, it fueled my anger. Good, I thought, in my darkest moments. He deserves to feel that. Our friends tried to intervene, gently suggesting counseling, urging us to talk to each other, but I pushed them away. I was trapped in a cage of my own making, the bars forged from blame and sorrow, and David was simply the keeper of the keys, a prisoner with me, but one I refused to acknowledge as equally wronged. The chasm between us grew with every unspoken thought, every cold glance, every memory of that terrible, beautiful, ordinary Tuesday.
The silence in our home, once a terrifying void, had solidified into an oppressive weight. We existed in parallel, two planets orbiting the same dead star, never quite touching. Months turned into a year, then a year and a half. The raw edge of grief had dulled, replaced by a chronic ache, but the blame had festered, poisoning the very core of my being. Our marriage was a hollow shell, held together by inertia, devoid of intimacy, comfort, or even shared sorrow. David had stopped trying to talk. He moved through his days with a quiet, almost mournful dignity, his eyes permanently shadowed. He'd leave for work early, come home late, retreating to his study most evenings. I, too, had built walls around myself, immersing myself in work or spending endless hours in Amelia's untouched room, clutching her small, soft clothes and allowing my mind to replay that day, meticulously assigning blame again and again. It was a torment I inflicted upon myself, and by extension, upon David. Then came the letter. It arrived one Tuesday, ironically, a solicitor's letter. I opened it, my hands shaking slightly, a premonition of dread washing over me. It was from David's lawyer. Divorce papers. My breath caught in my throat. I read the formal language, cold and impersonal, detailing the grounds for separation, the proposed division of assets, my name, David's name, scrawled beneath the legal jargon. It wasn't a shock, not truly. It was the logical conclusion to the path we had been on. Yet seeing it there, in black and white, felt like another death. I found David in his study later that evening. The room was dark, lit only by the soft glow of his computer screen. He was hunched over his desk, staring blankly at something I couldn't see. The letter was crumpled in my hand. I held it out, my voice trembling. "What is this?" He didn't look up immediately. His shoulders sagged. "It's over, Sarah," he said, his voice flat, devoid of emotion. "There's nothing left." "Nothing left?" I choked, a sudden desperate anger bubbling up. "There's still us. There's our family. What about what we promised?" He slowly raised his head, and I saw a look in his eyes that pierced through my anger, a raw, unbearable pain that was so deep, so profound, it stole my breath. It wasn't the guilt I had grown accustomed to seeing. It was pure, unadulterated anguish. "Us?" he repeated, a bitter, desolate laugh escaping him. "Sarah, we haven't been us since that day. You haven't looked at me, touched me, spoken to me without accusation in a year and a half. You think I don't feel it every single day, every silent meal, every night in separate beds, every time your eyes meet mine and all I see is her and all I hear is your fault." His voice cracked, and he slammed his fist on the desk. "I live it every waking moment, Sarah. I close my eyes and I see her little pink hat disappearing. I hear her scream. I feel the culvert water on my skin, the frigid cold as I searched. I failed her. I failed us, and I punish myself for it every single second. But your punishment, Sarah, is 1,000 times worse. You stripped me of my right to grieve alongside you. You stripped me of my wife, my partner, the only person who understood. You turned me into the enemy." Tears streamed down his face now, silent and devastating. "I can't do it anymore, Sarah. I can't live like this. I can't live with your hatred. I'd rather live without you, with just the ghost of her, than with the ghost of our marriage, haunted by your blame." His words were a seismic shock, rattling the very foundations of my carefully constructed world of grievance. For the first time, I wasn't seeing David, the man I blamed. I was seeing David, the man who was suffering just as intensely, if not more, because of the double burden of his own guilt and my relentless condemnation. His pain was real, it was palpable, and suddenly my own blame felt like a cheap, ugly thing, not a shield, but a weapon I had wielded against the person who was supposed to be my closest ally. I looked at his broken face, at the years of unspoken agony etched into his features, and for the first time since Amelia died, I saw him, not as the man who let go, but as David, my husband, the man who adored our daughter, who loved me fiercely, and who was now utterly shattered. His love for Amelia was just as boundless as mine, his dreams for her just as vivid, and in my stubborn, self-righteous grief, I had denied him the comfort of mourning with the only other person who truly understood. It was a moment of stark, terrifying clarity. The divorce papers weren't just a threat, they were a mirror showing me the monstrous reflection of my own unforgiving heart. If I lost him too, if I let my blame destroy the last vestige of our family, then what would I have left? Nothing. Absolutely nothing. It was a choice. Cling to the blame and lose everything, or face the terrifying, unimaginable prospect of letting it go, of extending an olive branch in the face of my deepest wound, and perhaps, just perhaps, saving what little remained. The tears started then, not the grief-racked sobs for Amelia, but bitter, burning tears of regret and shame for what I had done to David, to us. For the first time, the thought of forgiving him didn't feel like a weakness, but an urgent, desperate necessity, not for his sake, not entirely, but for mine,
to save myself from the desolation I had created, to save our broken family, if it wasn't already too late.
That night, after David's raw, unfiltered confession, I didn't sleep. I sat in Amelia's room, surrounded by the echoes of her laughter and the tangible reminders of her short life. The divorce papers lay on my lap, a stark testament to the precipice we stood on. I replayed David's words over and over, each one a hammer blow to the walls I had meticulously built around my heart. You stripped me of my right to grieve alongside you. You turned me into the enemy. His pain, once invisible to me through the fog of my own, now felt agonizingly clear. The next morning was awkward, heavy with unspoken tension. David avoided my gaze, his face grim. I felt a desperate need to say something, anything to bridge the chasm. "David?" I started, my voice hoarse. He flinched, bracing himself. I heard you last night." He just nodded, not looking at me. "I meant what I said, Sarah." "I know, and I don't want to lose you too." The words were a struggle, forcing their way past the years of resentment and pride. I want to try, if you do." He finally looked at me, his eyes cautious, wounded. "Try what, Sarah? To live in a house with someone who sees me as the reason her child is gone?" "To forgive you," I said, the words feeling foreign on my tongue. "To forgive myself. To find our way back." It wasn't a sudden burst of love or a magical healing. It was a stark, terrifying recognition that if I didn't try, I would be utterly alone, drowning in a sea of my own making. He didn't immediately embrace me or declare his love. His response was a weary, "It won't be easy, Sarah. I don't know if I can forget what you said, what you thought." His pain was still too fresh, too deep from my emotional abuse. And he was right. It wasn't easy. It was the hardest thing I have ever done. The initial shock of the divorce papers had forced my eyes open, but the journey of healing, of dismantling the blame, was a painstaking, often agonizing process. We started by going to a grief counselor, separately at first, then together. In those sessions, under the gentle guidance of Dr. Evans, the layers of our pain were slowly peeled back. My individual sessions were a battlefield. I had to confront the source of my blame. Dr. Evans helped me understand that my anger at David was, in part, a desperate attempt to regain control in a situation where I had none. If someone was to blame, then there was a reason, a logic, however flawed, to the universe's cruelty. If it was a random, senseless tragedy, then that was unbearable. It was easier to make David the villain than to face the terrifying truth that sometimes bad things just happen. She also pointed out that my guilt over not being able to protect Amelia manifested as anger towards the person I perceived as having failed to protect her. It was a complex web of self-preservation and misplaced grief. In our joint sessions, the conversations were brutal. David, initially guarded, slowly began to articulate the immense pain my accusations had inflicted. He spoke of his own guilt, the crushing weight of it, and how my blame had amplified it 1,000-fold, making him feel like a monster. He recounted the sleepless nights, the visions of Amelia, the desperate attempts to rewind time, to have acted differently. He had been suffering in silent agony, isolated by my resentment. Hearing his truth stripped of my defensive filters was devastating. I saw the depth of his suffering, the fairness of his resentment, and the profound damage I had inflicted. I broke down in those sessions, not just for Amelia, but for David, for us. I confessed my fears, my irrational anger, the selfish nature of my blame. I apologized, truly, deeply, for the first time. It felt like tearing open old wounds, but necessary. There were tears, raised voices, moments where both of us thought it was too painful to continue. One particularly difficult session, David stood up and walked out, unable to bear my confessions and his own memories. I thought it was over again. But he came back the next week, his face etched with exhaustion, but also a flicker of determination. We started small, sharing a meal at the same table, not speaking but just being present. Then hesitant conversations about mundane things, gradually easing into discussions about our day, our feelings. We revisited the park, a place we had avoided like a plague. It was agonizing. We walked the path, hand in hand, stopping at the culvert. I saw David's jaw clench, his eyes cloud over. He dropped to his knees, his shoulders shaking, as the raw grief that had been suppressed for so long finally broke through. I knelt beside him, and for the first time in years, I held him, really held him, not out of duty, but out of a shared, aching empathy. We cried together, our tears mingling with the damp earth, a communal release of sorrow and regret. Forgiveness wasn't a switch I could flip. It was a slow, arduous climb. There were days when the old anger would resurface, a whisper of what if that threatened to undo all our progress. Days when I'd catch myself looking at David, and that insidious thought would try to take root again. But now I had tools. I had awareness. I would acknowledge the thought, then actively push it away, reminding myself of his pain, of our shared loss, of the love that still, somehow, flickered between us. I learned to forgive him not by forgetting, but by understanding, by seeing that his guilt was punishment enough, and that my continued blame only compounded the suffering for both of us. Our relationship slowly, painfully began to reconfigure. It wasn't the passionate, carefree love we had before Amelia. It was something different, deeper, scarred, but also strengthened by the fire we had walked through. We learned to communicate our pain, our fears, our triggers. We learned to be patient with each other, to offer grace when the waves of grief inevitably returned. The fallout was immense, the loss of innocence, the permanent shadow over our lives, the raw emotional scars. But from that devastation, a fragile seed of renewed connection had begun to sprout, painstakingly watered by tears and relentless effort.
Years have passed since that dark period. Our home, once filled with the silence of blame, now hums with a different kind of quiet. It's not the vibrant symphony it once was with Amelia, but it's no longer the desolate void either. It's a quiet born of resilience, understanding, and a love that has been reforged in the fires of unimaginable loss and bitter forgiveness. Our relationship with David is not what it was before Amelia. It couldn't be. The innocence, the carefree joy, they are gone forever. We carry the scar of her loss, a phantom limb that aches with memories. But what we found on the other side of that abyss of blame and despair is something perhaps even more profound. A love that understands suffering, that has faced its deepest fears and still chosen to stand together. A partnership forged not just in happiness, but in the harrowing depths of shared sorrow. Forgiving David was not an act of benevolence for him. It was an act of profound self-preservation for me. Clinging to that blame had not brought Amelia back. It had not eased my pain. It had only festered, turning me into a bitter, isolated version of myself, slowly destroying the very foundations of my life. Letting go of it was like shedding a heavy, poisoned skin. It was terrifying at first, like stepping naked into a cold wind. But with each painful step, a little more light, a little more air entered my world. I learned that forgiveness isn't about excusing what happened or pretending the pain isn't real.
It's about releasing yourself from the burden of holding on to anger, of letting resentment define your existence. It's about acknowledging the wound, but choosing not to let it poison your future. It's a deliberate, ongoing choice, especially when the person you're forgiving is someone you love, who is also suffering, and whose actions were not born of malice, but of a tragic confluence of circumstances. David and I built a new rhythm. We continued therapy for a long time, individually and together. We learned to communicate not just our emotions, but the underlying fears and triggers that lay beneath them. We established rituals to honor Amelia's memory, not in sorrow, but in love. We plant a tree for her every year on her birthday, a small living testament to the life she brought into the world. We volunteer at a local children's charity, finding a small measure of purpose in helping others. These acts don't erase the pain, but they transform it, channeling our grief into something that breathes a little life into the world. We never had another child. The thought was too raw, too terrifying. We poured our love and energy into each other, into our community, into cherishing the fragile, resilient bond we had salvaged. We learned to appreciate the quiet moments, the shared glances, the simple comfort of holding hands without the weight of unspoken accusations. Our touch, once a source of pain and recoil, became a source of healing, a silent language of understanding and enduring love. This journey taught me an invaluable lesson. Resilience isn't about avoiding pain, but about enduring it, processing it, and finding a way to move through it without letting it destroy everything good in your life. It taught me that love, true love, is not just about the easy, joyful moments, but about standing by someone in their darkest hour, even when that hour is filled with your own crushing pain and the temptation to assign blame. It's about finding compassion, not just for the other person, but for yourself, for your own flawed, grieving heart. I look at David now, and I no longer see the man who let go. I see my husband, a man who carries his own profound sorrow with grace and strength. I see the wrinkles around his eyes, lines carved by tears and time, and I see a shared history, a testament to a love that almost broke, but instead transformed. Our story is not a happy ending in the traditional sense, because a part of our hearts will always ache for the little girl we lost. But it is an ending where two broken souls found a way to mend together by choosing forgiveness over bitterness, unity over isolation. And perhaps that's the greatest love story of all, not the one where everything is perfect, but the one where two people navigate the absolute worst, choose each other again and again, and emerge, scarred but whole, into a new, quiet dawn.